Right, good morning everyone. Before the meeting starts, I'm going to read out the statement as ever. I'm advised to inform you that this meeting is being videoed. Members of the public are entitled to record the proceedings and are requested to give prior notice so that any additional measures may assist can be put in place. Any member of the public who has any concerns should raise them now. I take it there's none. Okay, so welcome to Cabinet today, 3rd of July. Apologies for absence. Obviously, I have Peter Nutting and Steve Davenport. Any others? So, no. We've got Hannah instead of Roger, obviously. The minutes of the Cabinet meeting on the 12th of June have been circulated. Is everybody happy with those? Dean proposing them. I'm happy to second them. Can we just have a show of hands? Yeah. Right, public question time. We have several questions. Question 1 submitted by Mr. Piggott. Mr. Piggott here?
No.
No, he's not. So the response has been put out, but we'll move on to question 2, which was submitted by Mr. Kearns. Would you like to come and address Cabinet?
Press the button.
The one on the right.
That's okay. First time here. Good morning all. My question's regarding street lighting. Well, it's a pathway actually between Corinthian Drive, Underdale Road, which has been not working for, it's got to be 3 years plus now. It's a very vulnerable area for ladies, young children, and I can appreciate the council have sent their contractors to repair it several times, well, twice that I'm aware of. Unfortunately, they're confronted by an angry neighbour each time who threatens them with legal action if they start work on it for whatever reason. He's not happy with it being repaired. Now, every time it keeps getting back referred to the solicitors, the council solicitors, I believe, and this situation just seems to be going round and round in circles. So today, I really want to know what the solicitors are going to actually do to stop this neighbour coming out aggressively and stopping the contractors working.
Okay. We've got an answer for you. I'm going to call Simon Harris, who's the Deputy Portfolio Holder, to give you an answer. Okay, so thank you for the question. Simon?
Shall I return?
Yeah, you can go back. Thank you.
I'm not answering that.
No, you can't. It's, not in the meeting anyway.
Thank you. And the response is, Western Power Distribution has been instructed to carry out the street lighting repair, but they left the site following representations by the local resident. WPD have requested a further clarification from the council regarding the status of the lane and the rights to entry onto the land. This has now been clarified and a further instruction will be issued to WPD to carry out the work very shortly.
Thank you, Simon. The third question is from Elizabeth Knowles. Please come forward.
Good morning.
Morning.
This is about energy. West Mercia Energy is part owned by Shropshire Council, and the chairman of West Mercia Energy is Peter Nutting, the leader of Shropshire Council. The Marshes Local Enterprise Partnership has estimated that Shropshire could produce up to 20% of the West Midlands renewable energy needs. Since declaring the climate emergency, What action has Shropshire Council taken towards buying and supplying energy from renewable sources? And would Shropshire Council consider pushing for West Mercia Energy to be an investor in renewable energy production?
Thank you. And on Peter's behalf, I've got a response here. So currently 47% of electricity consumed by Shropshire Council as provided by West Mercia Energy comes from renewable sources compared to a UK average of 29% based on 2017-2018 data. Compared to electricity, there is very little generation or minimal availability of a green gas. West Mercia Energy is governed under joint agreement between the 4 local authorities, Shropshire Council, Herefordshire Council, Worcestershire Council and Telford and Wrekin. A joint committee operates on behalf of the member authorities and a business plan is approved by the joint committee each February. Any requirement to change the structure of West Mercia Energy to become an investor in renewable energy production would require the approval of all 4 member authorities. It is anticipated that any renewable energy project would have financial consequences in terms of the investment, management and return. This would need careful consideration and approval by all 4 member authorities to progress. The premium for green energy has dropped significantly over recent years and consideration of moving towards 100% green energy is being discussed.
Is it possible to have a written
Yes, yeah,
copy of that?
of course we can, yeah.
Thank you very much.
I've got question 4 from Peter Phillips. Peter's not here now. Okay, we move on. Question 5 from Sharuf Morsa.
Do I have to? Oh, you can hear.
Yep, you're on.
So, I have to take my glasses off to read. On your wonderful website, which I've looked at, you have 3 main objectives to your strategy for sustainability and climate change. The first one, which is to mitigate the effects of climate change through carbon reduction of our services. To which services are they referring, and what does this mean in practice? And what progress is being made towards achieving it? And additionally, have any indicators been set up to measure the performance of these mitigations? It's very important to be able to measure how these things are progressing.
Okay, so our climate change portfolio, the Green Dean, is going to answer.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. In answer to your first question, we are being very proactive, and the challenge of carbon reduction is one that is being considered and addressed throughout all council service areas. I would like to refer you to the attached document entitled Shropshire Council Towards Zero Carbon, Low Carbon Projects, that you will receive by email together with a written copy of this answer following the meeting. I would like to pull out a couple of the projects that have already been completed and show the breadth of service areas that are acting to reduce their carbon footprint. The first is Shrewsbury Market Hall, which has recently had a 22 kilowatt solar array installed on its roof and is in the process of having lights replaced with LEDs to reduce carbon emissions from the building and help to reduce the running costs. The second project I would like to mention is at Greenacres Farm near Baz Church, which is a day service facility which provides training in agriculture and horticulture for adults with learning disabilities. This has had a 50 kilowatt solar array installed to offset the power requirements and running costs of the farm. The project work also includes improvements to the insulation properties of the building and better irrigation and rainwater harvesting capacity. In answer to your second question, this is a very good point and one that has already been picked up in a wider sense internally. Part of the work of the Climate Change Task and Finish Group referenced in the next question is to establish a baseline of carbon emissions that will help to inform the Climate Action Plan, which is intended to go to full council in December. This is extremely important as it will enable us to set a realistic target for carbon neutrality for the council and also important milestone objectives along the way.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you. Question 6 is from Adele Mills. Come forward.
As this question was not answered at the last Cabinet meeting, I would like to ask the Council how often and to date how many times has the Climate Change Working Group met, and on what date will they feed into the revised strategy?
Okay, thank you. Again, Green Dean.
Thank you. As was reported at the Cabinet meeting on the 12th of June, the Climate Change Task and Finish Group met for the first time on Monday the 1st of July and outlined their intended work programme. Whilst I will be there to support and give evidence to the group whenever requested, it is for them to set their timetable and agendas. The group will be feeding into the corporate carbon reduction strategy, which is intended to be completed in September for Cabinet consideration during the autumn. Discussions will also be fed into the Climate Action Plan, which is proposed to go to full council in December.
Thank you.
Is there a specific sustainability officer?
We can't have follow-ups.
Okay.
All right.
It's just a process.
I did answer that question at the last Cabinet meeting.
Yes, you did, and we do.
Okay, thank you.
Question 7 from Claire Kirby.
Hi. So, given the climate emergency declaration, what's the council doing to review our transport policy?
Okay, thank you. And again, Dean.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Shropshire Council has over 3,000 miles of public road, of which there are numerous statutory and regulatory requirements. Currently, we are recycling tar that is in the highway network as far as possible. That is by ensuring it's treated or encapsulated in the highway network rather than disposing of this potentially harmful substance. The Council takes care in ensuring that any road scheme is cored, by which a sample of the materials underneath the road surface are taken, analysed by a certified laboratory, and a treatment decision is made. This then prevents this material being exposed or disposed of unnecessarily. A part of the wider initiative we are progressing on electric charging points, greener buses, solar power for highway device and warning signs, current and enhanced LED replacement programme for streetlights. Also, in any new developments, careful and exhaustive studies are undertaken, and the natural environment and ecology are considered as part of any business case in respect of mitigation or enhancement. Additionally, a local transport plan is being developed that will consider alternative travel methods such as walking and cycling. This draft strategy will be presented to Cabinet later this year and be considered for public consultation.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the main agenda again. Item 5 is member question time. There are none. Thank you. Item 6 is scrutiny items. Claire, are you presenting?
Thank you. I would like to recommend to move the recommendations of the Scrutiny Committee. I'd also like to make a few comments. I really want to thank Steve Davenport, who's unfortunately not here, and Steve Brown for bringing the parking into the 21st century, because the system we had before really wasn't fit for purpose. There's still a few issues. I think in the fullness of time we'll be able to sort those out. I know my friend David Turner will be raising a few points in relation to specific issues around the car parking. The other thing that was discussed was the parking, or was the footfall actually in Ludlow. And my question to you, although it's not a recommendation, is if Ludlow's getting the high street funding, then hopefully somebody from economic development will be talking to them and advising them on how to get the footfall cameras so that we can actually get some real data. Because at the moment we're relying on the public and an old system which doesn't really record things properly. The new system and the new method of collecting data at the car parks is really good. We've only got 6 months of that. And because economic development is so important to us, I think it's one of the things that we should be looking at probably in all the market towns. But I'm happy to take any questions. I don't know if Hannah's got any questions.
I had one comment on the recommendations, which was that it was my understanding that also coming out of that meeting was an agreement from the scrutiny committee that more publicity was needed for season tickets and for Pop and Shop, and I think that didn't quite end up on the paperwork.
Yeah. No, and I think that's really important as well, because people are confused, and actually the system is that everyone gets 15 minutes. 15 minutes on a proper parking space. However, you can't just pull up in a restricted area and park. For your 15 minutes you have to park in a designated on-street car parking place. So you're perfectly right, you know, we do have to do, communication has to be out there. And also we need to make sure that when we put all this equipment in, I'm sure David will mention this as well, that everywhere is marked out and clear. I mean, I've been going to Much Wenlock for, I don't know, all my life. And I missed the turning for the car park the other week because the bushes are about 4 foot across the entrance, so I missed it altogether. So things like that do need doing, but those really are separate from the recommendations. Thank you.
Hannah?
Also, just picking up on the business of measuring things, I think it's absolutely, you're right. We're sort of in a technological age now where we can have data about anything if we only take the time to measure it, and then we can use that to, you know, make really powerful decisions about how best to run things. So I think footfall data is really important in all of this, but there's a wider thing, I think, across council, and it harks back to the questions that have been asked about climate and transport and all those things. We do need to start measuring some of these things that are really important so that we can make better decisions about them. Thank you.
Okay. David, you wanted to speak?
Thank you. Very briefly, some of my points have already been covered by Claire, and I think Hannah's touched on them as well. I did speak at the scrutiny committee about car parks a few weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago, and I think that issues that I've got locally, I think may well be played out elsewhere. There seems to be very little promotion of the car parks at present. I think the only other thing that's been done locally has been done by me, and it did cross my mind that in addition to clearing the foliage away so that people can see where the car park entrance is, because there's no point in having signs which are invisible, it would be really helpful if enforcement officers had got some sort of leaflet or flyer, so if people at the fringe of getting a notice, they can put something on the windscreen, they can dish them out to people to encourage them to park elsewhere. It's good in terms of the council's income, it's good in terms of getting cars off the streets where possible, and I think there's a trick that's been missed there. The other thing, of course, is if there's more money being generated, we can invest it in keeping lighting bollards in place instead of removing them when they're damaged. We can use it on clearing gullies so we don't lose 2 or 3 car parking spaces. Of course, they're underwater. And finally, in terms of residence permits, I bumped into a lady who is one of the 3 permit holders, only 3 permit holders in Much Wenlock, and I'm sure there's plenty of potential for more, and who said it's the best £192 I've ever spent.
That's reassuring.
Well, it is, but if no one knows about it, there's a number of opportunities missed. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David. And I'm sure Steve Brown's taken on board your comments there, and you'll be looking at that. Just in terms of the footfall data, which Claire raised, I'd certainly bring that to economic growth's attention. It's something we need to work on across the market towns, as you say. So we'll be looking into that.
Can I just make a suggestion, since we've got Joe Gallagher here from Radio Shropshire? Maybe the 2 Steves would like to go on to the radio and actually talk about the residence permits, because you know, they've certainly got a wide audience, and hopefully it would help us and help the public in understanding.
I'm sure they'll sort that out if they need to. In terms of the recommendations, they are listed here. I take it there's no more questions, but is everybody happy to support? I'm proposed from the chair. David seconded. All those in favour?
Can I just advise that the recommendations are from scrutiny to you, and our officers will have to work up those recommendations with a report back to you with all the implications.
Yeah. Item 7 is Dean Carroll.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Bit different from me. I haven't got my green hat on for this one. This is largely a technical paper, but I will go through a couple of important elements of it, and I hope that everybody will see the merits of it and be able to support it. The first thing I'd like to point out is that there's no resource implications on Shropshire Council for accepting accountable status for West Midlands ADAS. In fact, paragraph 4.1 says exactly that, and paragraph 4.4 explains how the funding will be arranged by the regular contribution that all member authorities pay, as it is in fact at the moment with the current host, Worcestershire County Council. I'd also like to point out the benefits that accrue to Shropshire Council from having the chairman of the West Midlands branch of the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services as our Executive Director of Adult Services, and as is also the national portfolio, his national lead for policy in the National Association of Directors of Adult Social Services. That gives us a really strong voice at the national table when talking about getting fairer funding for adult social care out of national government in the future, and that's one of our biggest issues, and is the largest single call on our budget. So I can't emphasise enough the importance of having such strong representation regionally and nationally. I'm happy to take any questions on it, but I think it's a fairly straightforward paper, so I'll just move the recommendations 2.1 and 2.2.
Okay. Lee, you seconded that, are you?
Happy to second. I'd just like to take a couple of words if I could.
Okay, then we'll come to Hannah.
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to emphasise the reflection this pays to the work that we've been doing in Shropshire. Some might say under my role as portfolio holder for the previous years, but I obviously couldn't possibly say that. But I do think that we are very fortunate in Shropshire with our current Director of Adult Social Care. And I'd like to quote from the paper, and there's a quote from William Gibson which says the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And I do think that pays credit to the work that continues to be done both in terms of our opportunity to lobby nationally, but the very considerable work that we're doing in adult social care around looking at data and making best use of that. So I'd like to endorse and support the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam. And Lee. Hannah.
Thank you. I just had a question about the timing, really, in that the services have already been transferred on the 1st of April. The service level agreement is not yet drawn up, and we're here deciding in the middle of July that it should go ahead. So it seems a little bit backwards. Why was this decision not made earlier, and why was the service level agreement not in place earlier?
Thank you, Slee. Thank you, Hannah. This is just the fastest that we could get it together and bring it to Cabinet. There's nothing more in it than that.
One of those things. Okay. Can I show of hands, everyone's in favour of that, please? Thank you. Unanimous. Item 8, Star Housing Tenancy Agreement. That's Councillor Rob Macy.
Thank you. The report you've got in front of you, as the summary says, presents the outcomes of a consultation carried out by Shropshire Towns and Rural Housing on behalf of Shropshire Council with its tenants relating to a proposal to vary their tenancy agreements by introducing an updated and amended version. We did a similar exercise to this back in 2011. There's a couple of recommendations that come from it that you can see in section 2 and section 2.2i, I believe, if you look through the appendix, actually came from responses to the consultation, so that's been taken into account. And it's basically bringing the tenancy agreements up to date. We have 2 at the moment for different sorts of tenancies. This will bring them all into line in one and bring us up to date with the latest legislation. So the responses the consultation went out to all the tenants. There was a good response to it. So I'll move the recommendations and take any questions.
Okay. Simon, you want to speak on that?
Thank you, Deputy Leader. As I sit on the board for Star Housing, I'm all in favour of this. This is a great piece of work that's come out, especially items number 6, 7 and 8 that look at antisocial behaviour. We've had a problem in Broseley of late, and this does seem to reinforce the relationship between housing and the local authority and the police. I'm really pleased at how it's come along. Thank you.
Thank you. Dean.
Thank you. I'd like to formally second, and with my previous portfolio hat on for housing, pay tribute to the officers of Shropshire Council and Star Housing. It's been a long road actually to get to the final document to be agreed by all, but I think we're in a very good place with this now.
Okay. Hannah?
Thank you, Chair. I had 3 questions. Firstly, section 20, which is about this business of 4 weeks' rent being kept on account or something, which tenants were confused by. I'm not surprised because it was confusing. Could somebody explain exactly what that means? And if it's not a deposit, then what is it and where does the money come from? The second thing was about dogs, in that there's now a restriction on keeping dogs where there's a communal entrance. Can someone just confirm whether that has in any way impacted somebody who already had a dog and then were not able to have one? It seems reasonable sort of thing going forward, but was anybody actually affected in terms of a reasonable pet owner who was then not able to continue to keep a pet? And the other thing I thought was interesting, that 117 respondents to the consultation took the opportunity to raise a complaint about conditions, maintenance, all that sort of thing, which points to something of a sort of untapped level of dissatisfaction with housing conditions. The paper says that all those issues have been dealt with, but I do wonder whether or not there's an underlying issue in that residents have got issues that go on for a long time without them being addressed until a letter like this lands on their doorstep, and then they feel that there's a route by which they can raise them. So could somebody make a comment on that, please?
Who's answering that? Rob? Andy?
Well, I was going to say on the section 20 bit, as you say, I think I'm probably better getting you a clear written response from those to lay it out, so that if that needs to be circulated wider, there is a clarification on that point for you. The dogs in communal areas, I mean, I read that as, I think I can probably pick up the same. You're asking, are there any specific cases? Again, I'd have to refer to them if we're getting into the specifics of that. In terms of the 117 and it being an untapped thing, I mean, Star does a very good job of picking up issues for tenants. Having formally served on the board, I know that they have a process of picking those up. And as I say, they've been dealt with there. There's nothing to say that those are new ones that haven't been reported. But certainly I can contact them and ask them just for a general response to that, to any concern about that. So, yeah, we can do that and have those circulated.
Okay, thank you. So is everybody content with the paper, and it's been proposed and seconded, so all in favour, please show. Thank you. Item 9 is Treasury Management. David.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Leader. This is the traditional quarterly report, and this one covers the financial year ended on 31st of March, which shows how we're performing, or we have been performing, on the investments of the spare cash that's lying around from time to time. Nothing, of course, to do with the overall strategy on investing. This is simply detailing what has happened to the money that's been sitting in the bank at any one point in time. Members will see from the front page that yet again the investment team have outperformed expectations, which resulted in an additional bonus to the council of £119,820 during the last quarter. There is an awful lot of detailed information sitting behind the report, which, if people have got the time to read through it, is actually quite interesting and informative. But it is what it is. It is simply a report, and members are asked to note the report, and I so move.
Thank you. I'm happy to second it. No questions? All happy to note that then, please? Yep, please show. Thank you. Moving on. Quarter 4 performance is with Councillor Lee Chapman.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Yes, I think you were named on the paper. My colleague David Minnery was noted on the agenda, and I've come through and now taken a portfolio for performance, so pleased to report to Cabinet. The report is in front of you. There's just a couple of items that I'd like to highlight, if I might. The background to this particular report is that it reports against our corporate plan ambitions, both for our communities and those of our partners that we feed through that performance data through our portal. So all of this is forward facing and in the public domain through that portal. What this paper achieves is to report in some of those changes on a quarterly basis across 4 outcome areas: so healthy people, prosperous economy, resilient communities and commercial council. I won't be highlighting the performance, although it is considerably improved for Theatre 7. My colleague always gets a mention. I won't be doing that today. But I am pleased to highlight the increase in library visits. We've reported for a long time a decline in visits to our libraries, and I think it's testament to the work that's been done in our library service, particularly around the cloud library and the e-book service, which seems to be gathering considerable momentum, and we've now seen considerable growth in that area. It would be very remiss of me not to take the opportunity to congratulate colleagues in adult social care for sustained improvement and continuing to daily make individuals' lives better by making sure that their transfer out of an acute hospital into a settled environment continues to improve. Very low levels of what we would call detox, so delayed transfers of care. So they are to be congratulated, and that is certainly a highlight within this report. The only other one I'd like to touch on is the recycling rates. We've talked a lot about climate change, but it is worth bearing in mind that the reuse, recycle ambitions continue to be delivered, and we are a top quartile performer for local authorities across England. It would be remiss of me if I didn't highlight some of the areas where we continue to face challenge. Won't come as a surprise to any of you, certainly who've seen reports come in around budgets and the challenges within children's social care, to understand that demands for children and children's service and social care continue to increase across all service areas, and certainly that's reflected in the figures that we're showing here, and the implications for the local authority in terms of the impact that's having on budgets and service demands continue to rise. It's also worth noting, and we've mentioned this before, around road casualties. So they changed the way that these figures were reported and recorded. It'll now be 3 years. And what we found was that the numbers for what we would consider to be like-for-like figures showed an increase, which we are under the working assumption that it's related to the change in recording methods. We have now come to the end of the 3-year cycle, and so whilst we're anticipating the numbers levelling off, it will be interesting to see at next quarter whether or not that actually comes to fruition, or whether or not there is an underlying issue with road collisions. And the only other thing to mention, and it certainly is a challenge if you look at the way that we've had to make savings against our road budgets and the highways budgets, that the road condition survey is now showing a higher percentage of our non-principal roads should be considered for road maintenance, and I don't think there can be an elected member across the local authority who probably doesn't feel that daily in their postbag. So clearly the numbers now demonstrate the issue we have in terms of our road conditions. And beyond that, I will leave members to digest the other information, and please report back to us if there's particular issues that you want to see highlighted that we can progress.
Thank you. Leslie.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. As my colleague said, it would be amiss of me not to mention Theatre 7 and the Old Market Hall's continued increased performances, but actually that's all I'm going to say about that. Two things really. One, you will notice in the report that it does say that some of our other facilities have had a downturn or a slight decrease in visitor numbers. Please don't look at that too harshly, because Easter was in a different period last year, and seeing how wonderful Easter was this year, I'm actually expecting for the next quarter the figures to be even better than we expected. Thank you, Lee, for mentioning about the libraries. Whilst there has been a really good increase in the cloud library system, and I encourage people to look at that because it is excellent. It's not just about books, it's about newspapers and magazines as well. I would like to pay my particular thanks to the library staff who are working so incredibly hard to get more people actually into the libraries. And that work can be around all sorts of different things. And there's lots of work with adult social care and with public health going on in our libraries. And finally, I'm just disappointed that the leader of the Labour group isn't here, because normally he would be giving me a hard time for the fact that the library numbers have gone down, and I would like to have the fun of returning the pleasure. Thank you.
Well then, Leslie. Dean.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. As Councillor Chapman said, I'd just like to comment as well on 6.2 and delayed transfers of care, and I don't think I can say enough how phenomenal the improvement in those numbers are, thanks to the joint working of the ICS team that's now based within the Royal Shrewsbury Hospital to reduce delayed transfers of care. We're one of the most improved local authorities in the country, and now solidly inside the top quartile for that performance. In fact, the ICS team won an award earlier this year for just that project. So I do think it bears remembering that that's actually a phenomenal achievement from the base that we were at. Also, finally, to point out that our screening levels for the three principal cancer groups that are screened are all above the national average and haven't declined noticeably. They remain fairly static. In fact, two of them have gone up slightly over the course of the last 4 years. So I think that's another good marker to remember. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anna.
Thank you. As you know, Roger normally sits here, not me, and every now and then Roger can't make it, and I sit here instead. And I think the last time I was here was probably about 4 months ago, and the time before that was possibly a year ago. And at both of those sessions, I raised the issue that this report has nothing in it about measures that would help climate change. It's got nothing about the energy performance of the council. It's got nothing about the energy performance of the county. It's got nothing about the energy performance of homes. There are numerous measures that could be made about how the council and the county is dealing with climate issues. The very most basic one would be how much are we spending on our energy. You know, that's easy to obtain. It's not necessarily all that useful, but it's a start in the right direction. So it's been a year, basically, and I'm just deeply concerned that the council's recent commitment to tackling climate issues is lip service, because everybody's known that this needs to be measured, this needs to be looked at, this needs to be worked on for months and years, and it's still not here. And I think that it's an absolute travesty and an indication that the council is simply not taking it seriously. There really do need to be some clear measurements and KPIs and indicators of performance about managing climate issues, not just for the council but for the county as well. The second issue is that there's a handful of parameters on this report that actually have some indication of what we're trying to achieve. Most of them we're simply monitoring. So the adult social care performance is excellent, but we know it's excellent because it's telling us what it's supposed to be and we're measuring well against it. For most of the parameters in this report, all you've got is an idea that something's 60% and you've no idea really whether it's supposed to be 50 or 90 and whether up is good or down is good. And you know, the cynical might say that that's because the council is not achieving what it wants to achieve, so it's taken away the indicators that show us whether or not we're achieving what we want. You know, these are meaningless unless they've got something against them that says what it is that we're trying to achieve. Now, for some parameters that's difficult. For example, number of children taken into care. You might want that number to go down, but if there are more children that need to be taken into care, then you'd want it to go up. So it's not always straightforward as to what good is, but number of fatal road accidents, we definitely want those to go down. Number of children achieving a good standard in education, we definitely want that to go up. At the very least, these should have against whether or not they're going up or down and whether that's good or bad. It's pointless having these numbers with no real indication of what good is and whether or not we're achieving what we want to. Thank you.
Okay, Lee.
Yes, now I'm not an expert on climate change or performance figures, so I will allow Dean to field the issue around that. On the more general point around whether we think that the figures are relevant and are actually telling us something useful, I have some sympathy with that view, particularly if you look at our online performance portal. I think part of the problem is that we need to be clear about what aspects of these metrics we have a real stake in changing and to what extent we are reliant on others in terms of delivery. There's a danger, to my mind, of assuming that all of this is in our gift to influence. And the other thing that we're struggling against is the availability of the metrics. So some of these metrics that we're reporting on quarterly don't come out other than once a year. So we're leading an expectation that these figures are going to be available and moving in a real-time fashion, and they're not. So I think there is, I would absolutely accept that there is work to do around how we set out that ambition. But the core purpose of this is to reflect on our corporate plan issues, and so the reflection of that is based on the corporate plan. So in terms of whether or not any of these are getting better or getting worse, if you look on the portal, you'll see that some of them are helpfully coloured green. It's a slightly different green. And green means good, so they're the things that we're doing better at. And where there's a blue, it's like a nice pale sort of blue, that's where we're achieving the target that we've set for that particular ambition. So there's more information if you look into it in terms of the portal and where the movement has been. The issue, I suppose, for a cabinet report is how many numbers do you want? And I think that there's something there to be viewed, and that certainly as the newly in post cabinet member for performance, I'll certainly be happy to take those thoughts forward, and I'll let Dean pick up on the climate change issue if you don't mind.
Dean, and then I'll come back to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. I'm sorry to hear some of the choice of phrases that you've used in relation to climate change. I think it's unfortunate, unhelpful, and more than a little unwarranted, because actually, as you've heard from some of the questions I've answered today, I don't know whether you were at the last cabinet meeting in June, or I answered another 5 questions explaining what we're actually doing on climate change. And actually I would encourage you to attend the next meeting of the Task and Finish Group on climate change, because you will see that actually part of the work of the Task and Finish Group on climate change is to establish these metrics. And that is what we already agreed. That's what we already agreed at full council as part of the unanimous declaration of a climate emergency. So I'm sorry that you feel that we're not doing enough, but we absolutely are taking our responsibilities to climate change very seriously. I am the first portfolio holder in Shropshire Council's history for climate change. We're in the process of employing a new post for sustainability and climate change. We've committed to a climate action plan, which was agreed at council in May, will be brought forward in December for approval. So I do think it's a little unfair, the criticism. I will say that yes, it's not necessarily in this report, because the metrics measured in this report are the priorities established in the last incorporation of the corporate plan. But just because it's not in here doesn't mean it's not being done. And I would also like, very quickly if I can, Deputy Leader, just to say again on adult social care, it is rather frustrating that when something's not going particularly well, not necessarily you, but perhaps the person that you're standing in for today, is very quick to jump up and down and say this isn't going very well at all, it's a catastrophe, it's a disaster. But actually when something's going very well, it would be nice to get a little bit of credit for our officers in that who work very hard on this. It's not happened by accident, and these are things that we measure, and not measure for measuring's sake, but measure to actually achieve excellence in, and that, especially in delayed transfers of care, that is what we have done.
Thank you, Dean, and definitely reiterate everything you've just said there. So, Hannah.
Thank you. With regard to the metrics on the portal, Councillor Chapman, I was looking at the portal rather than the report. So I counted 2 orange, 1 light green, 1 blue, and the rest were all, so the other 100 or something, were all that funny greeny blue. That means we're just monitoring and we don't know whether it's good or bad. So work definitely needs to be done. With regard to climate change, I won't apologise for my language in that, because I think it's crucially important, and I think at best this council is playing catch up, and at worst it is paying lip service. So somewhere in between those two there's a truth, and it's incumbent, I think, on opposition members to be really holding the council to account on this, because it's crucially important. So fantastic. The more the council does, the more we'll be hearing. You'll be hearing from us that those are good things. But so far, it's been quite pitiful in terms of the, climate change is not a new concept. 10 years ago, there were councils who were really taking action on this, looking at their public transport policy, looking at their energy policy, looking at their planning policy, putting in local planning policies that meant that developments were far more sustainable than ours in Shropshire have been. So, there's time has elapsed, there's opportunities have been missed. Fantastic now if there's a turnabout and we are playing catch up. Brilliant. But we're certainly not going to sit and go, oh well, that's fine then, you get on with it. We will be keeping an eye on that, making sure that it really is happening. And there's such public interest in it at the moment as well, which is warranted, because it's an issue that is actually very important, and the council has a huge role to play in it. On the issue of adult social care, I think that some tremendous work has been done, and I think all credit should go to officers for the very hard work that has been done.
I'll take that as a win, Dean. So, anyway, moving on. All those in favour? Thank you. Item 11 is pushed into private session, so we move on to item 12, private sector housing enforcement policy, which is Willem. It's Rob now.
I've agreed to present the paper. Obviously, before you, the report is in response to the Housing and Planning Act 2016, which gave the local authorities more powers to deal with private sector rental housing. The one in front of you is our new private rented sector housing enforcement policy, which we approved previously for consultation in January. The consultation has now taken place, and this is the response to it. We are very lucky that we have a number of good landlords in Shropshire, and people do benefit from that and high standards of private sector housing, but there are, as anywhere else in the country, we do have some rogue landlords and some that are not up to standard, so this gives us additional powers to deal with those. The Act gave us the powers outlined in section 5.5, so I'll move the recommendations for the introduction of this policy.
Thank you. Julian Dean, you want to comment?
Thank you, Chair. I was interested in this one because I think it's an opportunity where we could be also looking at energy efficiency in the private rented sector. We know it's the dual issues of climate change and fuel poverty are probably more serious in the private rented sector than they are elsewhere. So I had a quick look through to see if that came up. And then I saw the stuff about the consultation. This is my concern. It suggests there was a consultation from February to April, I beg your pardon, and you only got one response. When I've looked through my emails, I'm not surprised, I can find no record of members being alerted to that consultation. I've gone through the monthly bulletin to council members. I've just been sitting here doing this. I've gone through all my emails and searched them using private rented sector. I've looked at my deleted emails, and then I've looked at the portal where we have the consultations, and it has a whole list of all the consultations that came to completion during April, and this one isn't listed. So I'm a little bit concerned as to whether this consultation actually took place and whether there might be perhaps another opportunity for people to comment on this, because I do actually think that some sort of licensing scheme in the private rented sector could really be a useful tool for dealing with, as I say, the dual issues of fuel use and fuel poverty.
I don't know that I can answer on the actual running of the consultation and so on. I'd have to refer that one back to officers in terms of how it's publicised and so on. And we'll just pick up on your point about fuel poverty and so on. We do have the Warm Homes Fund, which does work to address exactly those issues. So if any members would like details of that, or members of the public would like details of that, if they want to get in touch with us, certainly we can provide details how we can help with those issues.
Okay, thank you. Anna.
I had the same query as Julian. I think there was one respondent and it was an internal council body. There surely would be numerous organisations who deal with the fallout from poor rental accommodation who would be really interested to comment on this, and who would have something to say about how it should operate as well, and perhaps would have some good insight as to you bring in a new scheme like this and there are pitfalls and mistakes and things that don't work well. I'm sure it would work better if there were more active consultation with representatives of bodies who deal with people who deal with poor accommodation, but also from some private landlords. I'm sure the good private landlords out there would be interested in, it always skews the market if there are poor players, reducing rents but giving a poor quality accommodation. That's, good landlords and would love those to be rooted out of the market. So I'm sure they would have something to say also about your plans and proposals. So if it hasn't indeed been consulted on, and I doubt very much that it has, because I'm sure lots of people would be interested in it, then perhaps it should be before actually it is approved by this cabinet. My other comment was I'm pretty sure that on the portal, with regard to what you said about those schemes by which people could improve their home insulation and all that sort of thing, I'm pretty sure on the performance portal that we were just talking about, there's a metric for that, and I think it was 47 households have taken advantage of that, which doesn't seem a very high number to me, but then of course I couldn't tell because there was nothing on the portal to say whether 47 was a good number or a bad number. So, thank you.
Gwilym, do you want to comment?
The only observation I'd like to make, Chair, is that obviously I think the time to actually look at the policy is perhaps when it's been running for 12 months and what enforcement action we've actually had to be taking if we have had those complaints within Shropshire, and then dependent on the outcomes of that we can undertake a further review. The other point I would like to raise in relation to the performance of rented accommodation in respect of heating, obviously EPCs have to be carried out, and there is regulation from central government coming now for new tenanted properties that the EPCs have to be up to a certain level. And again, that may be something that the Climate Change Task and Finish Group wish to look at moving forward.
Back to Rob.
I was just going to say, I mean, we've got the author of the report, Karen Collier, in the room. I was just going to ask, can we invite her up if she wants to respond about the consultation or any other elements in it?
Yeah.
That'd be helpful.
Thank you. With regard to the consultation, it was brought to Cabinet for approval before it went out. So there was an opportunity to raise with members that it was out there for consultation. I'm not sure why Councillor Dean couldn't find it on the council website, because it did go out through the portal. In addition to that, we also presented the draft policy to the Shropshire branch of the National Landlords Association, and that's one of our main contacts in Shropshire, where we've got local landlords that can feed into this process. There was a bit of a delay in us producing this report to bring it back to Cabinet, because trying to give them additional opportunity to comment on it. So verbally they've said to us that they're fully supportive. They didn't have any objections, and unfortunately they just didn't write in to formally state that, which is a little bit frustrating because that's not captured then. I think it's one of those things that if people are generally agreeing with it, they're not as vocal in coming forward to say we support it. It's out there, it provides a level playing field so that the really good landlords are protected and tenants are protected, but it gives us an additional power for those rogue landlords. And in relation to fuel poverty, one of the ways that we can address that is through the Housing Health and Safety Rating Scheme. That allows us to deal with excess cold and the problems associated with that. The new policy will give us extra powers to deal with those really problematic properties. So I think that this is an additional benefit to address that particular problem.
Thank you. That's useful background information to have. So thank you. Okay, all those in favour? Thank you. Okay, item 13 is exclusion of public and press. I'll give a proposer and seconder. All in favour? Thank you. Thank you, guys.